What happens when Hollywood's golden boy walks onto a morning talk show and instead of charm, he brings chaos? In just 31 seconds, one comment was all it took for Chris Hemsworth to go from beloved guest to the most talked about exit in morning television history. This is a story about a morning that started like any other. The sun was shining through the studio windows. The crew had been there since 5 in the morning, setting up cameras, checking lights, making sure everything was perfect. The audience had lined up outside in the cold, excited to see their favorite stars up close. The makeup artists had finished their work. The teleprompters were ready. The producers were in the control room, headsets on, checking and double-checking every detail. And Alison Hammond, one of the most loved hosts on British television, was doing what she does best. She was in her dressing room, going over her notes, practicing her questions, making sure she knew everything she needed to know about her guest. She always prepared. She always cared. That's what made her special. That's what made her different. She wasn't just reading lines off a card. She genuinely wanted to make a connection with the people she interviewed. She wanted them to feel comfortable. She wanted them to have a good time. She wanted the audience at home to feel like they were part of something special. But what she didn't know, what nobody could have predicted, was that her guest was about to turn a simple interview into a moment nobody would forget. A moment that would be replayed over and over. A moment that would define not just that episode, but an entire conversation about respect, about fame, and about what happens when someone forgets that being a star doesn't make you superior. Chris Hemsworth walked onto the set that morning with confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from years of being adored by millions. The kind that comes from starring in the biggest films in the world. The kind that comes from being told you're perfect so many times that you start to believe it. He was wearing an expensive suit, perfectly tailored, probably worth more than most people make in a month. His hair was styled to perfection. His smile was camera ready. But there was something in his eyes. Something cold. Something that suggested this was just another box to tick. Another obligation to fulfill. Another appearance he had to make before he could get back to what he really wanted to do. The audience applauded when he walked out. They always did, because that's what audiences do. They clap. They cheer. They show their appreciation for the people they see on screen. But Chris barely acknowledged them. He gave a small wave, a quick nod, and then sat down across from Alison without really looking at her. Alison greeted him the way she greets everyone, with warmth, with energy, with genuine excitement. She stood up from her chair, her smile as bright as the studio lights, and said, "Chris, welcome to the show. We are so thrilled to have you here. Honestly, when we heard you were coming, the whole team got excited. We've been looking forward to this all week." Chris nodded. He sat down, adjusting his jacket. He looked around the set like he was sizing it up, like he was evaluating whether it met his standards. Then he looked at Alison, not quite meeting her eyes, and said, "Yeah, thanks. Let's make this quick, though. I've got a real interview after this." The words hung in the air. The studio went quiet. Not the kind of quiet where everyone is listening intently to hear what comes next. The kind where everyone is holding their breath, where jaws drop slightly, where eyes widen in disbelief. Did he really just say that? Out loud? On camera? To Alison Hammond, one of the kindest, most beloved people on television? Alison's smile didn't fade. Not yet. She's a professional. She's been doing this for years. She's dealt with difficult guests before. She's dealt with people who were nervous, people who were shy, people who didn't want to be there. But this was different. This wasn't nerves. This wasn't shyness. This was dismissiveness. This was arrogance, and she knew it. But she also knew that the show had to go on. So she laughed it off, a little laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said, "Well, we'll try to keep up with your busy schedule then. So, you're here promoting your new film. Tell us about it. What can viewers expect?" Chris leaned back in his chair. He crossed his arms over his chest, the universal body language of someone who's already checked out of the conversation. He said, "It's an action film. Big budget, huge stunts, explosions, car chases. The kind of thing that actually matters in cinema. You know, real filmmaking. Not like, morning fluff." The word fluff landed like a bomb. You could feel it ripple through the studio. The crew members glanced at each other. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman in the front row actually gasped, and Alison, sweet, kind, professional Alison, paused. Just for a moment. She looked at him. Her smile was still there, but something had shifted in her eyes. Something had changed. She said, "Morning fluff? Well, millions of people watch this show every day, Chris. They care about what we do here. They trust us. They invite us into their homes every single morning. That's not fluff. That's connection." Chris shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like what she said didn't matter. Like the millions of people who watched every day didn't matter. He said, Sure. I mean, it's fine for what it is. It serves a purpose, I guess. It's just not exactly hard-hitting journalism, is it? It's more like, I don't know, chat with your mates over tea, right? Light stuff, easy stuff. Haas. Nothing too challenging. The audience was silent now. Completely silent. You could hear the cameras moving. You could hear the air conditioning humming. You could hear someone cough in the back. You could hear hearts beating faster, because everyone in that room knew this was going somewhere bad. This wasn't banter. This wasn't playful teasing. This was an insult, and it was deliberate. Alison took a breath, a deep breath. She sat up a little straighter in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her voice was calm but firm when she said, "You know, Chris, this show is about connecting with people. It's about making them feel good. It's about starting their day with a smile. That's not fluff. That's not easy. That's actually really important. We work hard to make people happy, to give them a break from whatever stress they're dealing with, to remind them that there's still joy in the world. And I'm proud of that." Chris rolled his eyes. He actually rolled his eyes. On camera, in front of millions of viewers, in front of an audience that had come to see him, in front of a host who had welcomed him with nothing but kindness. He said, "Look, Alison, no offense, but I've done real interviews. I've sat down with serious journalists who ask serious questions about my craft, about the industry, about things that actually matter. This is just, I don't know, it's surface level stuff. You ask me what my favorite color is, or what I had for breakfast. It's not exactly groundbreaking. Can we just get through the questions so I can go? I've got places to be." And that was it. That was the moment. The moment when Alison Hammond's face changed. The warmth drained away. The smile disappeared. The kindness that had defined her entire career gave way to something else. Not anger, not rage, but resolve. She looked at him dead in the eye, unwavering, and said, "You know what, Chris? If you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. This is my show. These are my viewers. These are the people who support what we do. And I'm not going to sit here and let you disrespect them, or me, not for one more second." Chris laughed. Not a friendly laugh. Not an embarrassed laugh. A mocking laugh. The kind of laugh that says, "I can't believe you're making a big deal out of this." He said, "Oh, come on. Don't be so sensitive. I'm just being honest here. You do puff pieces. That's your thing. That's what this show is. And that's fine. There's a market for it. People like it, but let's not pretend it's something it's not. Let's not act like you're doing investigative journalism or changing the world. You're entertainment. Light entertainment." The audience gasped. Actually gasped. Out loud. Some of them shook their heads. One man in the third row said, "No way," loud enough for the microphones to pick up. And Alison stood up. She actually stood up from her chair. The producers in the back were scrambling. One of them was frantically speaking into her headset. Another was making frantic hand gestures. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second, every expression, every word. This was live television. This was unfolding in real time. And nobody knew what was going to happen next. Alison looked down at Chris, who was still sitting, still smirking. He's still completely unaware of the line he had just crossed. She said, her voice steady and clear. Honest? You want to talk about honesty? Let me be honest with you then. You walked in here with an attitude. From the second you stepped onto this set, you've been rude. You've been dismissive. You've been condescending. And now you're sitting there, insulting my show, insulting my work, insulting the people who watch us, the people who love us, the people who invited you here in the first place. That's not honesty, Chris. That's arrogance. That's ego. And I don't have to sit here and take it. Chris looked surprised. Genuinely surprised. Like he had never been spoken to like this before in his life. Like nobody had ever pushed back. Like everyone had always just smiled and nodded and told him he was wonderful. He said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on, I didn't mean it like that. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just saying, this isn't exactly 60 Minutes, is it? It's not the same level of, depth. It's different. That's all I'm saying." Alison crossed her arms. She wasn't sitting back down. She wasn't backing off. She said, "No, it's not 60 Minutes. You're absolutely right about that. Because 60 Minutes doesn't have heart. They don't make people laugh before they've had their first cup of coffee. They don't make families gather around the television together. They don't make people feel like they have a friend who understands them. We do that. We do. And if you can't see the value in that, if you can't see the importance of bringing joy into people's lives, then maybe you're the one who's surface level. Maybe you're the one who's missing the point." The audience started clapping. Slowly at first, then louder, then it was thunderous. Chris looked around like he couldn't believe what was happening. He said, "Are you serious right now? You're really going to make a big deal out of this?" Alison didn't blink. She said, "Yes, I am. Because you came here as a guest. You didn't come here to do us a favor. You came here because your studio wanted you to promote your film. And the least you could do is show some basic respect." Chris stood up now, too. He said, "You know what? Fine. I don't need this. I've got better things to do than sit here and get lectured by a morning show host." Alison tilted her head. She said, "Then leave." Chris stared at her. The whole studio stared at her. She didn't move. She didn't back down. She just stood there. She calm, collected, and completely in control. Chris laughed again, that same bitter laugh, and said, "Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. You're really going to do this?" Alison said, "I'm not doing anything, Chris. You did this. You walked in here with disrespect. You dished it out. And now you can't handle it when someone stands up to you. So, yes, if you want to leave, the door is right there." Chris shook his head. He muttered something under his breath. Then he looked at the cameras and said, "This is ridiculous. You're all seeing this, right? I'm the bad guy for telling the truth." One of the producers stepped forward. A woman in her 40s with a headset and a clipboard. She said, "Chris, I think it's best if you leave." Chris turned to her. He said, "What? You're kidding." The producer shook her head. She said, "No. Alison is right. You've been disrespectful. This interview is over." Chris looked around the room. He looked at Alison. He looked at the cameras. He looked at the audience, who were now staring at him with a mix of shock and disapproval. He laughed one more time, threw his hands up and said, "Fine, whatever. This whole thing is a joke anyway." He pulled off his microphone. He tossed it onto the chair. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't apologize. He just walked off the set. The cameras followed him as he stormed past the crew, past the producers, and out the studio doors. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the studio. Alison stood there for a moment. The audience was still clapping. She took a breath, smoothed down her jacket, and turned to the camera. She said, "Well, that was unexpected. But you know what? We don't tolerate disrespect here. Not to me, not to my team, and definitely not to you, our amazing viewers." The audience erupted. They weren't just clapping anymore. They were cheering. They were standing. Alison smiled, a real smile this time. She said, "Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we've got a lovely cooking segment that I promise will be much more pleasant than whatever that was." The cameras cut. The lights dimmed slightly, and Alison sat back down, still composed, still professional. One of the crew members came over and said, "Are you okay?" Alison nodded. She said, "I'm fine. He needed to hear that. They all need to hear that. You don't get to walk into someone's house and treat them like dirt just because you're famous." Behind the scenes, the producers were already on the phone. The studio executives were watching the live feed. Social media was exploding. People were already posting clips. The headlines were already being written. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that Alison had stood her ground. She had defended her show. She had defended her team. And she had shown everyone watching that kindness doesn't mean weakness. When the cameras came back on, Alison was back to her usual self. Bright, bubbly, full of life. She introduced the cooking segment with the same enthusiasm she always had. She laughed with the chef. She made jokes. She engaged with the audience. It was like the last 15 minutes hadn't even happened. But they had, and everyone knew it. In the green room, Chris was pacing. He was on the phone with his publicist. He was angry. He kept saying, "She embarrassed me. You this on live television. She made me look like the villain." His publicist was trying to calm him down, trying to explain that he had embarrassed himself, but Chris wasn't hearing it. He was too caught up in his own pride to see what everyone else could see. That he had walked into that studio with an ego the size of a planet, and Alison had simply refused to inflate it. Back on set, the show continued. Alison was talking to the chef about the perfect way to make a Victoria sponge cake. She was laughing. She was tasting the batter. She was doing exactly what she had always done, bringing joy to people's mornings. The audience loved it. They loved her. And in that moment, it was clear why she was one of the most beloved hosts on television. Not because she was flashy, not because she was controversial, but because she was real. She was kind. And she knew when to stand up for herself. The cooking segment ended. The show moved on to a musical performance. Then to an interview with a children's author. Then to the closing segment where Alison thanked everyone for watching. She didn't mention Chris. She didn't reference what had happened. She just did her job. With grace. With professionalism. With the same warmth and energy that had made her a star. When the show finally ended, the crew gathered around her. They hugged her. They told her she did the right thing. They told her they were proud of her. Alison smiled and said, "I just did what anyone would do. I stood up for us. That's all." But it wasn't just that. It was more than that. It was a reminder that respect is earned, not given. That fame doesn't excuse bad behavior. That someone can be kind and strong at the same time. Alison had shown all of that in just a few minutes, and the world had watched. Chris left the studio that day without looking back. He got into his car. He drove away, and he probably thought that would be the end of it, that people would forget, that it would blow over, but it didn't. Because moments like that don't just disappear. They stick. They linger. They become part of the story. Alison, on the other hand, went about her day. She finished her work. She talked to her team. She probably went home and had a cup of tea. And she didn't give Chris Hemsworth another thought. Because she didn't need to. She had said what needed to be said. She had done what needed to be done, and that was enough. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional segment turned into something much bigger. It became a moment that people talked about, a moment that people remembered, not because of the drama, not because of the conflict, but because it showed something important. It showed that you don't have to accept disrespect just because someone is famous. You don't have to smile and nod when someone treats you poorly. You can stand up. You can speak out. And you can do it with dignity. Chris Hemsworth walked onto that set thinking he was untouchable, thinking his fame gave him a free pass to say whatever he wanted. But Alison Hammond showed him that respect is a two-way street, that kindness is not weakness, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply say no. In just 31 seconds, everything changed. One comment, one dismissive remark, one moment of arrogance, and it all came crashing down. Not because Alison wanted it to, but because Chris refused to see the value in what was right in front of him. He refused to respect the platform he was given. He refused to respect the woman who was giving him that platform. And in the end, it cost him. The cameras captured it all. Every word, every look, every moment of tension. And when it was over, people didn't talk about Chris's new film. They didn't talk about his stunts or his career. They talked about how he had been put in his place by a woman who refused to be walked over. They talked about Alison, about her strength, about her grace, about the way she handled herself with such class, even when she had every right to lose her temper. That's what made it unforgettable. Not the conflict itself, but the way it was handled. Alison didn't yell. She didn't insult him back. And she didn't stoop to his level. She just stood firm. She set a boundary. She made it clear that disrespect would not be tolerated. And then she moved on. Chris, on the other hand, couldn't move on. He left that studio angry, defensive, convinced that he was the victim, convinced that Alison had overreacted. But the world didn't see it that way. The world saw a man who thought he was better than everyone else. A man who thought his fame made him special. A man who learned, in the most public way possible, that it doesn't. Alison Hammond didn't set out to make headlines that day. She didn't set out to go viral. She just set out to do her job, to host her show, to make people smile. But when someone walked into her space and tried to diminish what she didn't let it slide. She stood up. She spoke out. And she reminded everyone watching that you don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be harsh to be firm. You just have to know your worth and never let anyone make you forget it. So what happens when Hollywood's golden boy walks onto a morning talk show and brings chaos instead of charm? He gets shown the door. Not because the host wanted drama, not because she wanted attention, but because she knew that respect matters, that her work matters, that her viewers matter, and that no amount of fame or success gives anyone the right to treat others like they're beneath them. Chris Hemsworth learned that lesson the hard way. And Alison Hammond? She didn't need to learn anything. She already knew. She had always known. And on that morning, she made sure the whole world knew it too. The moment the microphone hit the chair, and it was over. The moment he walked off that set, it was done. And the moment Alison turned back to the camera with that smile, it was clear who had really won. Not because she wanted to win, but because she had simply refused to lose. This wasn't just about a bad interview. It wasn't just about a rude guest. It was about something bigger. It was about standing up for yourself, about knowing when to draw the line, about understanding that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. And Alison Hammond showed all of that in the most powerful way possible, by staying calm, by staying strong, and by never, not even for a second, backing down. That's the story. That's what happened. And that's why, long after the camera stopped rolling, people are still talking about it. Not because of what Chris Hemsworth said, but because of what Alison Hammond did. She stood her ground, she defended her worth, and she did it all with the grace and dignity that had made her a star in the first place. In just 31 seconds, one comment changed everything. And by the time Chris Hemsworth walked off that set, he had learned something he probably should have known all along. Fame doesn't make you important. Respect does. And Alison Hammond had both.